Our last speaker and presenter is an amazing leader who was just recently sworn in as president of the Washington State Labor Council. She is the first woman to be sworn in as president of the WSLC and the first Black woman to be elected president of an AFL-CIO state federation. From her bio, April Sims' lived experience is evidence of the power and potential of organized labor. The granddaughter of Louisiana sharecroppers and the daughter of a single mother, Sims has seen the power of union to change lives. The Great Migration brought Sims' grandfather to Washington, where his union job provided economic dignity for his family. Her mom's union job pulled her family out of the cycle of poverty. As a young mother, it was Sims' union job that allowed her to build economic security and activated her as a leader in Washington's labor movement. What I also like about April, more than anything, is that she's from Tacoma and a lifelong resident. So please welcome April Sims. Thanks for joining us, April.
Thank you so much for having me. And good afternoon, everyone. I love that you give me a shout out for being a lifelong resident of the gritty city we both proudly call home. Folks who know me know that I ride pretty hard for the 253. And thank you for that kind introduction. Thank you, President Hines and the leadership of 367 for inviting me to speak and to share space with you today, and to be the last speaker for your leadership conference. It's a really exciting time. Also would love it if you would just drop the link to the playlist, because I was jamming out to the music when we were waiting to get this started. Y'all, I prepared a not so great PowerPoint. I want to set a really low expectation for my PowerPoint, but there are a couple photos I'm going to want to show you throughout this presentation. So while I think I won't show the whole thing, I will lift up a couple as we go through this presentation. But good afternoon. Like President Hines says, my name is April Sims. My pronouns are she and her, and I have the privilege of serving as president of the Washington State Labor Council, AFL-CIO. And as is consistent with our practice, I do want to take a moment and ground myself and acknowledge the land that I'm on. I am joining you all from the traditional lands of the first people of Tacoma, the Puyallup tribe. And I honor with deep respect and gratitude their elders, past and present, for their stewardship of this land and its people. I thank them for the privilege of living and working on their land. And mine is a legacy of stolen people on stolen land. So I add my voice to the struggle for Black liberation and the movement for Black lives, and would invite you all to take a moment and join me in considering the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us all into this space. And I hope that you will consider uncovering these truths at your meetings and events moving forward. Thank you so much. I am going to do a quick screen share and get the PowerPoint started. There we go. Oh, okay. So technology is not going to let me be great today, but no worries. We'll just move forward. Because this is a leadership conference, I thought that I would start with telling you a little bit about my story and my journey into leadership. I like to say that the labor movement changed my life, and I'm not being dramatic when I say that. I was raised by a single mother of three, and my mom, Cherie, believed in hard work and the American dream. She didn't expect to get rich, but she did expect that if she worked hard and she played by the rules, she'd have the dignity that comes from making enough money to take care of her family, that she'd be able to pay the bills, put food on the table, and if she planned just right, maybe put up a little something so she could retire one day. But that dream wasn't our reality because we were poor. And we weren't like money is tight, wait till next payday poor. They just cut off the electricity poor. We were on and off welfare for most of my childhood, and my mom wasn't lazy. She worked. I mean, she was one of the hardest working women I knew. Sometimes she'd work two jobs right before school started or around the holidays when times were especially tight. But hard work was never enough because something would inevitably happen. One of us would get sick and she'd miss work. I remember the time that we all got the flu and we did that thing that kids do. We didn't get sick all at once, but rather back to back to back. And she missed 6 days of work. And because she didn't have paid sick leave, she didn't get paid. And since she didn't get paid, she couldn't pay the rent. So for a while, we were homeless and had to go back on welfare. Sometimes she'd quit because the working conditions were bad. I remember the winter she worked the early shift at the dry cleaners, and the manager refused to turn on the heat because she was the only one working. And I would get up early and watch her prepare for the day, and she'd put on her multiple layers of long johns and fill up her big thermos of coffee and head out the door. And I remember her coming home with fingers still stiff from the cold. I remember her desperation and her frustration that we just couldn't get ahead. For every 2 steps she would take forward, something would push her back. And we were trapped in this cycle of poverty. And then she got a union job and things changed. I remember her coming home from her interview and she said, "Baby, if I can just get this job, it's going to change our lives." And she was right. Her union negotiated a contract that made sure her hard work was rewarded with a livable wage so she could pay the light bill. Her contract included good benefits like paid sick leave and health care, so she didn't worry about how she was going to make the rent when my brother and sister and I all got the chicken pox. Her union fought for her. When they reclassified her position and her union fought for back pay, she used that money to buy her first car, which meant she didn't have to take the 1.5 hour bus trip from our house on the hilltop all the way out to Western State Hospital where she worked. Her union gave her a voice. When her supervisor was making inappropriate comments, she was afraid to say anything. She didn't want to lose her job because she knew her kids were counting on her. But she did mention it to a coworker who happened to be a union shop steward. And her union shop steward told her, "Cherie, you're not the one who needs to worry about losing your job." And after 30 years of hard work and commitment, my mom retired with economic dignity and financial stability because of her union pension. That is the American dream. And that dream was only made possible because she had the opportunity to join a union. So I know firsthand the difference that our work makes in the lives of workers, families, and communities. And it is that knowledge that's driven my service in the labor movement. And like many of you, I'm only here today because someone invited me to a local meeting, because the shop steward in my workplace saw leadership in me long before I saw it in myself. Now, when he asked me, I said, "Sure, when's the meeting?" He said, "It's at 7 o'clock and on a Wednesday at downtown Puyallup." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm not gonna make it. I gotta get my kids from daycare. I gotta make dinner. I gotta do all the things." But he kept asking because he was trained in leadership identification and he saw that something in me. And finally, he said, "We're dealing with this workplace issue. We're going to go to our local and ask our local for support. And if you show up, you can vote and your vote can really make a difference." And so I have been showing up and working to make a difference ever since that very first union meeting. But an essential part of my story that I'm just learning to share this year is that I was a high school dropout and a teenage mom. And I'm here because my union made a space for me. And because my union, like your union, held leadership conferences and events and created a space for me and invested in me. So I owe a lot to this labor movement. And I really believe it is a privilege for me to lead out the Washington State Labor Council and serve as president. So thank you for letting me share a little bit about my story, and tell you a little bit about what brings me to this work and what motivates me to do this. I'd like to talk a little bit about the Washington State Labor Council and who we are and how that relates to the work that you all do and how we build power for the working class here in Washington State. The Washington State Labor Council is the umbrella labor organization in our state, the largest labor organization. We represent more than 600 locals and affiliates and nearly 650,000 unionized workers in every sector, every corner, and every industry of our state. We proudly boast having the third highest union density in the nation. At nearly twice the national average, that means 1 in 5 workers belongs to a union in Washington state. And my role as president is to build a vision for our future and to uphold our Constitution. And this is where I want to show you. There we go. Our Constitution, this is our governing document. The Constitution of the Washington State Labor Council charges us with combating resolutely the forces that seek to undermine the democratic institutions of our nation and to enslave the human soul. It says that we shall strive always to win full respect for the dignity of the human individual whom our unions serve, and that we recognize that the fates of all workers, Black, Brown, Indigenous, Asian, or white, are interconnected, and that we either rise together or fail. That we will win when all workers are recognized and empowered. And that by acknowledging that economic justice and racial justice are inextricably linked, we commit to sharing the responsibility for racial justice and equality and actively working together to achieve the transformation in our unions and workplaces and in the community. And I just think that that is beautiful language. And I want to talk a little bit about how that work translates, how we take the language in our Constitution and use that to build multiracial, intersectional working class solidarity, because that is the only way that we win for workers. Perfect. So, how about some examples of what the Washington State Labor Council does? We are probably best known for our work in politics and in policy. I like to say that policy is only possible because of politics, that we only care about votes in November because it impacts the votes that occur in March and April, which is when the state legislature is in session. But it is really how we use politics as a tool to build power and impact the change we want to see so that we can pass meaningful policies. So we run what is largely considered the second largest independent voter turnout program in the state of Washington, probably just behind the work that the party does. We believe that we have a responsibility to increase voter participation and encourage working families to run for office, encourage more women and people of color to run for office so that we can bring the values and the voices of workers into the halls of power. We support pro-worker candidates who are endorsed by mobilizing rank and file union members to talk to other rank and file union members and to make sure that we are getting out the vote, that we are giving union families all the information they need so that they can participate in our democracy. But we also work with community partners, faith-based organizations, nonprofits, small businesses, civil and human rights groups, because we know that we can't do this work in a vacuum and we can't do this work alone. And it is our field work that holds electeds accountable to the promises that they make when they are competing for our endorsements. And that allows us to work on good policies like secure scheduling and safe staffing, workplace safety issues, fighting for equal pay, fighting for housing policies, affordable housing policies, and all of the many intersections to the solutions that workers are facing when it comes to accessing affordable housing that is near where they work. Retirement security, affordable childcare, combating wage theft, protecting prevailing wage, using collective bargaining to balance the power dynamic at work, and the policies that lift all workers out of policy. And I say all workers because our work is about more than just workers who have the opportunity to belong to a union. Our work is about supporting all workers in Washington state and using our institutionally recognized power to build power for the working class. And that is only made possible through a multiracial, intersectional working class solidarity effort. So those are some of the policies that we work on and some of the ways that we work on policy. But I want to take you way back in the way back machine. And this may not be way back in the way back machine, but 2015 in COVID time was a long time ago. In 2015, we had a divided legislature. We had an anti-worker majority in the Senate, and we had a pro-worker majority in the House, which meant that the good policy that we were working for in the House often went to the Senate to die, and that we had to count on the House to be a backstop for a lot of the really bad policy and anti-worker policies that were coming from our state Senate. And many of these attacks were ideological. They weren't just because we were facing a budget deficit, but we were facing attacks on collective bargaining rights and on prevailing wage and on the social safety net. So in 2015, we had this divided legislature, and at the end of legislative session, the two parties still had not come to an agreement on the operating budget for the state of Washington. So at the end of the regular session, they went into what's called a special session, which extended the legislative session for another 30 days so they could get their work done. At the end of this 30 days, they still had not come up with the final operating budget for Washington state. So they went into an extra special session. At the end of that 30-day period, their work still wasn't done. So they went into an extra special session, which didn't really feel extra special to many of us. So on June 29th, which was just one day before the deadline for them to finalize their budget, the governor, in his infinite wisdom, released a picture of the final closed-door budget negotiations. This is the picture that you see on the screen. These are the folks who, behind closed doors, were negotiating the 2-year, $35 billion operating budget for the state of Washington. These are the folks who are making decisions on healthcare, decisions on funding for education, decisions on funding SNAP and TANF benefits and mental health programs and child care and all of the things that working people care about. I don't know who was on his comms team at the time. But if you look at this picture, and you might have to zoom in a little bit, but if you look at this picture, I wonder if you can just use the chat and tell me what you don't see, who you don't see represented in this picture. And I'm happy to kick this off. You might still be using the chat, but what you don't see represented in this picture are any women. What you don't see represented in this picture are any people of color. Someone in the chat says, look at all those white cis men. You don't see any women, no diversity, no women, no people of color. And I would add to that because I know or knew many of these legislators. These are all wealthy white men, landowners, corporation owners, folks representing tech. There is not a single working class person represented in this pic. That's right, there are no working people. So in 2015, we knew that we had a problem on our hands that was more than just about what party was in control of which chamber, and what party was in control of the House and the Senate and the governor's office. That our work was not just about Democrats and Republicans, but this was about whether or not the needs of working class folks are represented in the halls of power. And what happens when folks who don't look like us or don't have our lived experience are the only ones making decisions that impact us and our communities and the people that we love and that we care about. So we knew we had to come up with a plan to bring our voice and our values into the halls of power. And we knew that that plan was only possible through multiracial, intersectional solidarity, meaning that we had to work outside of just the labor movement and outside of just the usual suspects and the folks that we often see in power, and consider what it was going to take to bring those voices into spaces where their voices and their experiences could be centered in the solutions. And so when we think about like, what does that look like in terms of our political work and in terms of our community work, political power in the terms of politics and policy, like I mentioned earlier, how do we do that and at the same time stay grounded and rooted in the values and the charge of our Constitution, which is to fight the forces that seek to enslave the human soul? And that is where multiracial, intersectional working class solidarity comes in. I have learned that most of us individually in our own unions don't have enough political power to pass meaningful policy on our own, but that many of us have enough, just enough political power to sometimes kill policy. And that our political work is only made possible with the help of community. That as strong as the labor movement is, and I mentioned we proudly boast having the third highest union density in the nation, but that means that only 20% of the workforce in Washington state is represented by a union, which means 80% of the workforce in our state is still fighting for an opportunity to have a voice at work. And so fighting the forces that seek to enslave the human soul is about more than just wages, benefits, and working conditions. But our work is about workers, families, and communities. And we can only build power by being in real relationship with each other and with our communities. And I say our communities because I think a lot of people like to talk about community as if workers, as if we aren't part of our communities, and we are. This is not an other. This is us bringing our full selves into the spaces that we occupy and bringing the voices of our community into the spaces that we occupy. So I want to give you a couple of examples of how we have used community and how we have used multiracial, intersectional working class solidarity to pass meaningful policy in Washington state. So I want to talk a little bit about minimum wage and paid sick leave. Many of you were deep in this work with us back in 2016. But you might remember back in 2016, we worked on an initiative and passed an initiative that raised the statewide minimum wage to $13.50 over a period of a few years, indexed that statewide minimum wage to the CPI, or the cost of living index, and included 1 hour of paid safe and sick leave for every 40 hours worked. And that this initiative impacted more than 1 million workers in Washington state. But since I'm talking about the way back machine, we started working on raising the minimum wage and trying to pass paid safe and sick leave back in 2012 through policy work, through our state legislature. And I mentioned at that time we had a divided legislature and we really just couldn't get anything passed because of those divisions. So we decided that we would do an initiative to the voters and that we would go out and we would signature gather. And that we would run the largest volunteer signature gathering program the state of Washington had ever seen. That was only made possible because we built a coalition of not just labor, but of faith-based organizations, nonprofits, small businesses, women rights organizations, and all of us took a chunk of that work and we owned it. We were able to gather enough signatures. It was 326,000 signatures in just a short period of time because we had this coalition. And everybody was committed to doing this work that would raise the floor for all workers, which again is why in Washington state, we currently have the highest minimum wage in the nation because of the work that we did in 2016 and because of the durable coalition that we built to do this work. We made sure that in this effort, there were no carve outs. It didn't matter how many employees you had. It didn't matter what region of the country or county you worked in, what part of the state you worked in. Every worker who worked in Washington state would be included in this minimum wage, including agricultural workers and farm workers, because that was critically important to our coalition. And we were only able to fight to include those things because of our strong coalition. And even though the big corporations in Washington state, like Kroger and the Restaurant Association, spent millions of dollars in an attempt to defeat it, we were successful because of our coalition and because we built real intersectional solidarity, multiracial working class solidarity. Now, every worker earns 1 hour of paid safe and sick leave for every 40 hours they work, which works out to be close to 7 paid days of paid safe and sick days a year. But I want to I'm just checking the chat. I want to also talk about how the work we did in 2016, building multiracial working class solidarity, intersectional solidarity, positioned us to pass paid family medical leave in Washington state. In 2017, we still had a divided legislature. But we had been working on paid family medical leave for years. California was the first state in the nation to pass paid family medical leave, and we wanted to be the next state in the nation. And in this divided legislature, we were able to pass paid family medical leave, that once a worker worked 820 hours of work, they would qualify for up to 12 weeks of paid family or medical leave and a total of 16 weeks if they combine both family and medical leave. Arguably, this is the best policy in the nation. Workers can earn up to 90% of their wages depending on their income. And if you compare that to California, where workers get 55% of their income for paid family medical leave, you can see that passing this policy has had huge impact directly on workers here in Washington state. But the only way we were able to do this is because we had just won an initiative for paid safe and sick leave in 2016. And business knew that they had to come to the table and negotiate this policy with us, or we would run another successful initiative. And they didn't want to lose again. So we forced them to the table and forced them to negotiate. And it was messy because it was a negotiation, but it was important to be able to do this and flex the power of the working class, not just the power of labor unions in Washington state, but the power of the collective working class and our communities, and small business and faith-based organizations and women's rights organizations. And I lift that up because I think if you consider the fight against the Kroger merger and how important a coalition and how important bringing community is, or how important bringing community together is in this fight against this Kroger merger. Now, I was looking at the Federal Trade Commission's mission, which is protecting the public from deceptive or unfair business practices and from unfair methods of competition through law enforcement, advocacy, research, and education. I think, oh, perfect. If they're true to their mission, then stopping the merger is a no-brainer, right? It sounds like it should be the easiest thing to do. But when you factor in politics and you factor in that politics is fueled by money and that Kroger has a lot of money, we know that they have the money. This is where this gets sticky, right? We can't just count on the Federal Trade Commission's mission to get them to do the right thing, right? A fight like this forces us to build a broad coalition of politicians and consumers and community members and workers and nonprofits, environmental justice groups, poverty reduction groups, faith-based organizations, because this multiracial intersectional solidarity is the only way to combat corporate solidarity, which is what we've seen time and time again, and is really what we're fighting with the Kroger merger, right? This is about multiracial working class solidarity, intersectional solidarity being the counterpoint to corporate solidarity. And all of these mergers that we're seeing, not just with the Kroger merger, but with mergers all across the country, and in fact, international mergers. I am just checking the chat quickly. I see some questions, and I'm looking forward to carving out a little bit of time before we finish to get to some Q&A with y'all. But I want to offer that multiracial working class intersectional solidarity isn't just how we win campaigns like raising the minimum wage and passing paid sick leave, or how we stop the merger, or how we win the Stop the Merger campaign. I want to offer that multiracial intersectional working class solidarity is how we build a durable, strategic, inclusive labor movement that all workers want to be a part of. It is how we as leaders leave this movement better than how we found it. It's how we seize the opportunities before us. It's how we convert the enthusiasm and the passion for worker advocacy that we're seeing all across this country into concrete, meaningful gains for working people. It's how we leverage our networks and our resources to grow good union jobs all across Washington state. It's how we center workers and grow our movement in the transition to a post carbon economy. It's how we use our power and our tried and true organizing strategies to combat racism and xenophobia, to protect and expand body autonomy rights and reproductive freedom. And it is how we defend our democracy. I would submit to you that building multiracial, working class, intersectional solidarity is our legacy. And it's how we as leaders ensure that our institutions live up to the unlimited power and potential of our movement. So I was thinking about how I might close this discussion today, and I was reflecting on watching Wonder Woman with my family a few years ago. I should tell you that I'm Team Marvel, but it was the early days of the pandemic and we were a little desperate. But I was watching Wonder Woman fly through the air, and I remember thinking, man, if I could fly, how would I do it? Would I fly with my hands up in the air like Wonder Woman, out to the side like an airplane, behind me like a dart? I spent most of the movie just kind of thinking through the advantages and the disadvantages of these three ways to fly. And so when the movie was over, I remember asking my daughters, if you could fly, how would you do it? Would you fly with your hands up in the air, out to the side like an airplane, or behind you like a dart? And I asked my daughter Naya, and Naya is super efficient. She's admittedly A type. She is working on becoming a nurse, so she's a scientist. And she says, "Oh no, mom, I wouldn't fly like that. I would fly with one hand up and one hand bent and one leg bent, so I could be super aerodynamic and be maximum efficient through the air." And I thought, oh, I didn't even think about that. I didn't think that you could fly with one hand up and one hand bent. So I asked my other daughter, Jasmine, if you could fly, how would you do it? Hands up in the air, out beside you like an airplane, or behind you like a dart. And Jasmine is my creative. She's a spoken word artist. Her hair is never the same color for longer than a week. And she says, "Oh no, mom, I would fly like I was snowboarding. I want to rock heel to toe through the sky, and I want to land real cool on my feet." I thought, oh, I didn't even think about that you could fly like you were snowboarding. So then I asked my husband, Marcus, I said, "Marcus, if you could fly, how would you do it? Up in the air, out to the side, behind you like a dart?" And like Marcus is a total dad, right? He just wants to relax and watch the game. And he said, "No, I'd fly with my hands behind my head, my feet crossed at the ankles. I'd lay on my back. I just want to relax when I'm flying through the sky." And I thought, oh, I didn't even think about that. I didn't even think that you could fly on your back, relaxed. And so I became fascinated by this question. And I started asking people everywhere I went, if you could fly, how would you do it? One person told me I would fly like a butterfly, low to the ground, from flower to flower to flower. And I thought, that sounds lovely. Naya would hate it. It's not very efficient, but it sounds lovely. Someone else told me that they would fly with a bumper pad in case they bumped into anything. This tells me a lot about this person. That's probably what I would need, bumper pads. Someone else said, oh, I'd fly with wings. Someone else told me I would levitate. I want to be 6 inches off the ground so folks can just watch me float by. Someone else told me they'd fly in a flock. They want to be surrounded by all of their sisters through the air in this beautiful flock. Someone else said they'd fly by flapping their hands and their feet, which I'm still trying to get my mind wrapped around, but it sounds like a lot of fun. And then I asked a young man, my daughter's friend, Elijah, if you could fly, how would you do it? And he said, oh, Miss April, I wouldn't fly. I would teleport. And I was like, I didn't even think about teleportation. I was only thinking about these 3 ways to fly. But that is the beautiful thing, that when you are working to create multiracial, intersectional working class solidarity, and when you invite people to imagine with you and to create with you, no one ever says, that's impossible, I can't fly, right? Everyone pauses and imagines and dreams. And I've learned that if we invite the people around us to imagine with us, to innovate with us, to bring their different ideas and their perspectives, their different needs, that we not only come up with several ways to fly, you realize that there are infinite ways to move. And so, sisters, brothers, siblings, I am grateful to be in the movement with you. I am grateful to be invited to share this space with you. And I am looking forward to imagining with you, creating with you, and to flying with you. And so I want to thank you for inviting me to talk a little bit about the work that is possible when we do it together, when we build multiracial, intersectional working class solidarity. And with that, I will pause and see what questions you all have for me. And Michael, I know you're in the room, so I don't know if there are folks in the room that have questions. Michael is asking, you all can probably see the chat too, but I'll lift this up. Michael, how do we best coordinate with the Washington State Labor Council and local central labor councils and hi y'all, and community allies to fight back against the merger or other corporate welfare? Big question, I know. I think that you are doing a lot of that work already. I was actually looking at the website though, and I'm embarrassed to admit to you, I don't see the State Labor Council listed as one of the endorsing organizations. So I will rectify that today. Um, I think there are a number of things that we can do together. I mean, we have the stand and putting this information out on the stand, and helping to bring community allies to the table. I think that we could host a conversation, either on Zoom and or in person with all of the organizations that the State Labor Council and our CLCs have relationships with, and do maybe a Q&A and an education session on what this merger means, not just to workers, but what it means to communities and what is going to happen, especially in some of our rural communities when if this merger were to go through, and make sure that folks have all the information that they need. We start with education, and then we move to agitation, and then we move to mobilization. And I think that there is a role for the State Labor Council to assist in that effort, making sure that we have community partners that can hear from the workers and folks in their community who will be directly impacted by this merger, and what those impacts will be, so that we can get them fired up and engaged. And we can do that through our central labor councils as well. How can we win the fight in 2024 with the merge? Childcare is a big issue for families. So I think I talked a little bit about the merge. I'm going to go through some of these Q&As, or some of these questions, and we'll just ask you all to let me know if I miss anything. But let's talk a little bit about childcare, because childcare is a huge issue. I think what we have to do is change the way we talk about childcare. We have to first talk about childcare as a worker issue and address it in the same way we address other infrastructure needs. That if workers need it, it's a worker issue. And just in the same way that we need accessible highways and we need public transportation, we need government to help be a part of the solution when it comes to childcare. The real problem with childcare is not just that it's unaffordable for many families. I mean, that's one problem. The other problem is childcare providers are some of the lowest paid workers in our economy right now. So the solution can't be to just drop the cost of childcare. And at the same time, the solution can't be to just increase the wages that the workers get, because these are two competing problems. So this will require an employer and government and worker combined solution. The other problem with childcare is accessibility. That childcare is typically a Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Kind of industry. And so many workers work after hours, work weekends, work multiple jobs, that it is hard to find childcare for the hours that workers need it. So we are working with childcare advocates and we are working with childcare providers on policies that will help the Washington state government help to subsidize some of the childcare needs, as well as helping to professionalize, maybe not helping to professionalize, but elevate the profession because these childcare providers are professionals in their own right. But to elevate the profession, there are um, plans or at least conversations around apprenticeship programs for childcare providers that will bring providers in and upscale as they upskill their work. There are plans right now to set aside funds for like first year apprentices that need some additional support and financial assistance for childcare. Once they get into apprenticeship programs, their wages go up and they no longer qualify, but their wages aren't qualify for subsidies, but their wages aren't high enough to be able to afford the high cost of childcare. I said a lot. It is a multi-pronged problem, which will require an intersectional solution. And we want to make sure that as the State Labor Council, we are bringing all of the folks that are working on those policy pieces together so that there's a holistic approach to solving the problem. Somebody is asking again, what is wage theft? Anytime your employer doesn't pay you for the work that you perform, wage theft can show up in a number of different ways. Wage theft can show up in, your employer requiring you to clock in 15 minutes before your shift starts so that you can do your site work, but not paying you for those 15 minutes. Or telling you that you have to work through your break because you're really busy right now, but you're not getting paid for that time. Or it can be even more blatant than that. Oftentimes, wage theft is subtle, and it shows up kind of in the way that your employer is managing your time. But oftentimes, it is blatant in that you might be a roofer, and you work for a roofing company for a week, and they don't pay you, and a week later they change their name and they're operating under some other DBA, and you just never get paid for the work that you have performed for your employer. um, I hope that answers that question. How is the WSLC addressing women's and transgender medical rights? It's a great question. I would say a couple of things. When we have working backwards, we are probably the only state fed in the country that has a director level position that is responsible for racial and gender justice. And we believe that a fundamental value, in fact, our labor movement was founded under the fundamental belief that our power comes from our ability to control and, when necessary, withhold our labor. Our right to control our bodies is where our power as workers comes from. So we lead with that fundamental belief in mind. We have a women's community. We have put together a toolkit around women and transgender medical rights, around reproductive freedom, including the right to access safe, affordable abortions, and are unapologetic about our responsibility to be a voice for that. And I'm happy to follow up with more information and some resources. I can either drop those in the link or send them to President Hines so that you have some additional information on the role the Washington State Labor Council is playing in that space. I want to be clear that we take our lead from organizations who have been doing this work for a lot longer than we have, and that our job as an institution that has a lot of institutionally recognized power is to make sure that we are not co-opting the work that they're doing, but that we are lending our voice to the work that's already happening. Paid medical leave up to 90%. What is the minimum percentage? I'd have to look that up. I want to say the minimum percentage is 80%, but I believe that it is based on income. But I'm happy to look that up. I'm not a policy expert on, I just pretend to be on the paid family medical leave. Why can't the profit from the Washington State Lottery be used for the benefits of the citizen rather than those who are employed by the Washington Lottery? It's a really interesting question about the Washington State Lottery, because I think I remember when the lottery was established that those funds were supposed to go to fund education. And somebody is shaking their head. So I think somebody is sharing that memory with me. I see you, appreciate you. And there's been a lot of talk over the years about whether or not that money is still being used to fund education or if it's just being dropped into the general fund. I think we have to be careful in terms of asking. I'm trying to think of the best way to answer this question. And then I should probably do a time check because I don't know how much time I have left and I don't want to be disrespectful to your agenda today. But I think we have to be careful in terms of who plays the lottery. Is not the wealthy folks in this state. The folks that are getting rich off of the infrastructure and off of having workers that are producing the profits for their companies. So asking folks, oh, my time is up. I'm so sorry. But I think asking folks, I think we should be asking corporations to help fund the infrastructure that workers need, and childcare is part of that infrastructure, rather than asking, workers like us to foot more of the bill. I don't have I could say that a little more elegantly, but my time is up. But I think we have to be careful about those things. Thank you so much for letting me join you and be a part of your conference. Thank you for all of your questions. And I guess I am going to turn this over to President Hines now.
Hey, April, thank you so much. I was trying to come on screen because I didn't want you to sign off without me thanking you and saying goodbye. We appreciate that presentation. I look forward to building a partnership with you. I know there's a lot of great work that we can do together.
Absolutely. And I'd love to explore this idea of, a convening of labor and community partners to educate folks on the merger and what it will mean, and then to talk about how we mobilize them.
Yeah.
Perhaps we can follow up on that.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, thank you so much. We'll be in touch.
Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
Not be able to stay home, brother.